Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on this webinar all about how to drive sustainable high-level engagement, brought to you by HRZone and Achievers. Now, we talk a lot about employee engagement in the HR space. It's been a big topic for the past 20 years or so, and as a result, there have emerged many tools, technologies, methods, and best practices for boosting the engagement of our workforces. But are we seeing positive results from all of this effort, or do we need to be changing our approach? And if the latter, what would a new successful strategy look like? During this session, we'll be pondering these questions, exploring the importance of putting the focus back on the employee and looking at how real-time technologies can support this. So we've got lots to get through today, but before we get stuck in, I'll do the introductions and then walk you through a few of the key features available on this webinar platform. So my name's Becky, and I'm the editor of HRZone, and I'll be your host for today. And then presenting first is Jasmine Gartner, employee engagement author, trainer, and consultant, and she'll be exploring the current engagement landscape, including the challenges, opportunities, and giving some best practice advice to you. Then following Jasmine, we'll have Denise Willett, Senior Director of EMEA at Achievers, and she'll be discussing in more detail how employee recognition and feedback can be used to drive employee engagement, particularly through using real-time tools. Just a few points on the functionality first. So if you have any questions today, please just click on the purple Q&A icon to submit them, and we'll ask them at the end of the presentation. We should have about 10 to 15 minutes for questions, so we do encourage you to submit your questions to us. If you'd like to tweet on the webinar, you can do so directly through the platform by clicking on the Twitter icon. If you think a colleague or a friend would find the webinar useful, you can send them the link by clicking on the paper aeroplane icon. And if after the webinar you want to do some further reading on the topic, just click on the green icon with paper on it, and you can download a new white paper from Achievers on driving sustainable engagement through real-time recognition and feedback. And I really recommend you doing this, as it's an extremely useful resource. So one final point, we'll also have a poll for you today between the two presentations, so please do keep an eye out for that and make sure you take part. So I think that's all from me, so I'll now hand over to Jasmine to get started.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Jasmine. I am an anthropologist. That's my background. And I run a training and advisory consultancy specializing in employee engagement, unconscious bias, and diversity and inclusion. So it's a topic I'm really, really fascinated by. And I wanted to start with a story and a stat. So this is my story. Not too long ago, I went to do a training session, and it was in one of these new buildings that are completely made out of glass, and you can see everything that's going on. And the manager who had brought me in came to collect me from reception, and then he brought me upstairs to the room that we were going to be using. And as we walked along, he said to me, I want you to know you're going to have a great day. My guys, it was 4 men, they're really great. They're really interested. They're curious. They're smart, and it's really going to be a good day. And at that point, we arrived at the room, and I went in, and off he went. And one of the guys said to me, we saw you talking to our manager, and we just want you to know whatever he just told you is a lie. He's a snake. And, of course, this was quite ironic. And 6 months later, when I went in to do a refresh, what was really interesting was that they now really got along with their manager and had a great relationship, and things were moving along in terms of engagement. So I like to call the space between those stories, those two sides of the story, the black box of employee engagement. So on one side, you have people who are disengaged, and on the other side, you have people who are engaged, but it's really hard to know what goes into that box to get that transformation. The stat that I have for you is one that you'll be familiar with, and it's just how low engagement numbers are. For a really long time, generally speaking, they hovered at around 33%. Now it seems to be even lower. 25% is what some people say, even lower than that. I think we'll have a stat coming up that's at 8%, and this despite the fact that people have been throwing resources and research and so on at this subject for decades. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to look at some of the challenges and opportunities, really look at all the things that people throw into that black box of employee engagement to try and solve it. We'll look at what I think of as a new paradigm, a new approach to employee engagement, and I will end with some practical tips for you. So let me start with some of the challenges and opportunities. Now, I think over the past 20 years or so, people have been trying to solve the problem of employee engagement, but all these kinds of things get in their way, both negative and positive. So there will be things like well-being or even mental health, and these are really positive changes that employers are starting to look at these a lot more. However, they are still things that people have to address at work in addition to all the other work that people do. So what you see is that the employee in employee engagement starts to really disappear as people look at the challenges and the opportunities and focus on those instead. And if we then zero in on the problems with employee engagement specifically, if you look worldwide, the problem has gotten worse. The percentage of fully engaged adults who work full-time is 15%. According to Gallup, less than 25% according to Aon, and that's just in the past year or two. And the interesting thing as well is that while a lack of engagement and productivity stays more or less static, the ability of organizations to actually address the problem of engagement has fallen, which means, of course, that the problem will continue to get worse. If we just look at the UK alone, then Gallup had a number from a few years ago citing that disengaged staff cost the UK economy approximately 52 to 70 billion pounds every single year. And in the same study from Gallup, but 4 years later, they found that just 8% of Britons are engaged. And the Taylor report, which came out last year, which was really interesting and looked at the state of work in the UK, found that half of employees thought their manager was good at seeking their views, but only 1 in 3 managers say they allow employees to influence their decision-making. So you can start to see where the gap is in terms of the problems with employee engagement. So all of these challenges are coming at people, and people have really tried hard to figure out, well, what is employee engagement? And they've looked at all sorts of aspects of it. And my pie chart here isn't an exact representation of all the different parts. It will vary from company to company and from time to time. But things that people have considered, they think performance management, wellness, workplace design, employee voice, all of these kinds of things contribute to engagement. But again, by focusing on all of these characteristics, you lose sight of the employee in employee engagement. Because the problem has stayed the same, it hasn't really improved at all, what you also see is that people have tried really hard over the past at least 20 years to come up with ways to solve the problem. So, of course, Gallup came up with their 12 questions. If you're familiar with the McLeod report, they came up with this idea of the 4 enablers. People do annual surveys. There are staff forums here in the UK, which I'm actually quite a big fan of. Engage for Success has been doing quite a bit of work. The Times has been running their best places to work for years. And, of course, there's things like Investors in People. The thing is, though, with all of these things, is that they're things we do. So it's research, it's processes, it's tools, it's models. And once again, the employee has been obscured. And nothing has really changed. So despite everything that we've thrown at the problem, money, time, research, models, tools, and so on, the problem has not improved. And so I think we're at this point now in the past few years where people realize that really the paradigm has to change in how we manage. And for me, I think the really key point here is that despite all the challenges and opportunities, the tools that we have and so on out there, I think it's actually really important to come back to the individual. right? That's why it's called employee engagement. We should be focusing on the people at work that we're trying to engage. And when I think about what employee engagement means, I think you can break it down into 4 things. I think it boils down to having a sense of purpose and satisfaction at work, also a sense of personal responsibility and belonging to a group. So I've come up with a model that I think sort of starts to describe how you can engage with individuals in the workplace. And what I did was I broke down the idea of employee engagement into 5 spheres where you see engagement either happening or failing to happen. And in each of those spheres, you can engage with the individual people in your workplace. So these 5 spheres, it looks a bit like this. If you imagine that the universe, the solar system, is made up with engagement at the center of it, then the 5 spheres are the company. Then the next one is the work itself. The next one after that is the team. And then there's the network. And finally, there's society. So these are all interlinking. They're all different. You can have engagement in some of them, but not all of them. The aspiration, of course, would be to be able to get all of those working well so that there's engagement on every level. But it is the real world, and it's entirely possible that, you might just really get engagement going in a few of those spheres, and that would be really great as well. So I just want to break down what I mean by each of these spheres. So we'll start with the company. So in the company sphere, what's really happening is you're looking at how the individual employee, how you get them to plug into what your organization is doing. And I think the goals here, the personal ones that you're aiming for, are purposefulness and satisfaction. So in order to start to build that in the workplace, and you might recognize this from the McLeod report, it's 2 of the enablers. The really key thing is for employees to understand their company's strategic narrative. So, where they were in the past, that's led to where they are now, and where they'd like to be in the future, and how they would like to get there. By understanding that, then employees will have a sense of purpose. They understand what they're contributing to, and that in turn will help them derive satisfaction from their work. The other side of it as well, it's this 2-way dialogue. I like to look at it as almost a social contract where if employees need to listen to the strategic narrative, then the other side as well, it's really important to listen to employee voice. I think of employees as the canary in the coal mine. Since they're actually doing the work, they will have ideas, or at the very least a fresh pair of eyes, and they might see how they can contribute to improving that strategic narrative. And again, by listening to people, you will emphasize, you'll encourage their plugging into the bigger picture and their sense of purposefulness and satisfaction at work. The second sphere is the work itself. Now, this one is very much about the individual, and I like to look at it on 2 levels. The first level is their environment. So do people have the tools that they need? Do they have whatever it is in that environment that helps them to work well? That's something, coming back to personal responsibility, that they have to understand about themselves and that they have to be able to communicate. So both on the level of the tools they need as well as their own personality. What makes a good work environment for them? You can look at this in terms of CPD as well, where they will then be able to identify their gaps, the gaps in their understanding of the big picture of the work that they're doing, so that they can start to express what they need, whether it's in terms of training or in terms of their environment, but also so that they can set boundaries, so that they can share with people what makes them comfortable, uncomfortable, and so on. And again, by doing that, you are listening to people. By listening to people, you will enhance their satisfaction in the workplace and increase their purposefulness. The next sphere is the team. Now, I think of the team as a small group of individuals. Normally you'd think that they'd be in the same space, but even if they're not in the same space, they all know each other pretty well. And this is really key. So when you have a team of people who know each other really well, it means that they will be able to take risks. They can challenge comfortably. In a small team, you normally don't have a strict hierarchy. What you'll see is because people know each other well enough and know themselves well enough, they will put themselves forward for projects that make the most sense for them and maybe take more of a supporting role where they feel their skills aren't best utilized. Again, by encouraging these relationships and encouraging people to know each other, then it enables people to start to think about their own personal responsibility to their team as well as to the wider organization. And it will also enhance that sense of belonging that's really important for us as people. The next sphere is wider. So it's the network. And the network could be just different kinds of teams. It could be a multinational organization with sites across the world or even just sites across a country. It could be different departments, whatever it is. But in this scenario, the key point is that people don't know each other well anymore, the way that they would in the face-to-face team. And because they don't know each other, then you need, as an organization, to build structure to enhance communication. So how do you do that? You provide really clear information in terms of rules and regulations and compliance, what the organizational structure or hierarchy is, so that people, again, can plug themselves into it and see how they can contribute, which will, again, bring around purposefulness, and also allow them to identify what their responsibility is and how they can contribute. And the interesting thing here, especially in this day and age for me, is how we can actually use technology to create connection. When I go out to work, and I'm always encouraging people to have face-to-face meetings if they can, but it is the real world, and that's not necessarily a given. So what can you do? Of course, we have so much technology nowadays that will help people to connect. And so again, it will contribute to those goals that I mentioned before about purposefulness and personal responsibility by people understanding how they can connect with others across this dispersed field. Then that will allow them to actually take the initiative and jump in. Now, the last sphere sort of encompasses all the rest, and the last sphere is around society. And this is a quote from a Harvard Business Review article from several years ago that I really love. And what they say is that the crucial contribution that companies make to society is transforming ideas into products and services that solve problems. And I think this is an amazing idea. And I think that if companies, when they're thinking about their strategic narrative and where they're going, if they can really clearly identify what problems they're solving for society, then once again, you're going to attract employees who are interested in solving that problem. You're going to give them a sense of purposefulness and satisfaction. And again, it helps people to feel like they're part of something much bigger. So with all of these spheres, what you really see happening is that the individual is brought to the forefront, and so they can engage with what the company would like to do, where it's going, and so on, and have their voice heard. And that, to me, is the crux of employee engagement. So based on that, I have a few tips for you. My first is choose people over processes and models. So instead of focusing on the obstacles, the opportunities, not that you shouldn't focus on them at all, but first come back to the people. And then choose tools that employees can make their own. So whether that's something like Yammer or other kinds of technology that we have that we'll probably be talking about in a few minutes, you want to choose tools that are usable by your employees, that make sense for them, and that they actually will engage with. And my final tip is really try to close the black box of engagement. So instead of just chucking things in there and hoping for the best, try and break down the idea of employee engagement maybe into these 5 spheres and figure out what will actually work to get the individual employees that work for you engaged. So that's it. That's all I have for you. So I'm going to pass you on to our poll.
Thanks so much, Jasmine. Some really great insights there. And do remember, guys, if you have any questions for Jasmine, please do submit them using the clicking on the Q&A icon, and we'll get to the questions at the end of the session. So yeah, before we move on to Denise's presentation, we wanted to pause for a quick poll. This should be popping up on your screen now, so please do all take part. The question we want to ask is employee engagement seen as a strategic business measure within your organisation? So the options for you to choose from are: yes, it's measured and discussed at all levels; yes, but mainly within HR; sort of, some people get the importance; no, it's rarely if ever mentioned; or not sure. So we'll just give you a few more moments to choose from these options before we look at the results. Okay, great. So the results are in. We've got 45% saying yes, measured and discussed at all levels, which is really great. 15% yes, but mainly within HR. 35% say sort of, some people get the importance, and not sure 5%, 0% for no. So Denise, what are your thoughts on this? Does that surprise you at all?
Actually, Becky, it's quite encouraging. You know, we ask this question a lot at Achievers. I've been in the employee engagement space for a number of years, and here in the UK for a year and a half. And this number is slightly increasing as we start to ask it. So, you know, we do know that putting employees first is continuing to become more part of the strategic narrative at many organizations, and certainly, you know, even in the media and with the government here in the UK as well.
Great, yeah, it looks like really encouraging to see those results there. Okay, we'll dive straight into your presentation then, Denise.
Okay, fabulous. It doesn't change the fact that, as Jasmine's talked about, the level of engagement here in Britain is still quite low, and it has been going on a downward trend, you know, to the tune of $70 billion in lost productivity. And, you know, Achievers, we really live and breathe employee engagement. So we've worked with many organizations who see those business benefits of putting people first and at the head of their strategy. So we're definitely trying to impact this, and I believe we have a real opportunity here to start making some positive change. But it's important to start to understand why and how we got to where we are. So there's been a real shift in the workforce in the last, you know, decade or so. You know, it's no longer just about having a job and paying your dues, or you know, working at the same organization for 30 years. That's just not what millennials are looking for anymore, and just people are looking for that connection, that meaning in their jobs. We've got the gig economy, the mobile workforce. You know, Jasmine covered a lot of the external factors that our people are dealing with today, employees are dealing with. So the entire landscape has really changed. And what we know about this change is that this shift where employees are, you know, seeking out those meaningful jobs, it requires a greater alignment between employees and their employers. Recently, I interviewed a candidate for a role on my team, and it was very interesting. A lot of the questions that I get these days are around, tell me about the culture of your organization, or what do you love about working here? What don't you like about working here? And, you know, sometimes I'll even go back and say, you already know. I know you've been on Glassdoor today. You know what that looks like. But these are questions we just didn't get many years ago. You know, I remember my very first job at Big Blue in the early 2000s. I can't imagine ever having asked, what does the culture look like here? I was just so happy to have a job, and I thought I would be in that job for, you know, my entire life. But that's not the reality that we live in today. But when we can get this alignment between employees and organizations, when we get it right, you can see it. I mean, we only have to be customers or consumers ourselves to experience this. We've all either, been around a company or worked with a company where you can feel that passion and that buzz when employees really, really believe in what they're doing and they are engaged, and when they're emotionally invested in what they do. I had an experience not that long ago where I ordered a birthday gift for my daughter from Amazon, and it didn't show up. And when I called in customer service, the customer service agent immediately, was inquiring, was this a gift? They wanted to know, how important this was. And right away, the agent, she refunded my cart and placed me a new order immediately and said, this is not your problem, this is my problem. And I could really feel that empowerment in that organization. And I felt good about it as well because she was able to fix the issue right then and there. And she was very happy about being able to do that. And we know the customer experience is never going to be better than your employee experience. Research out of Harvard in the 90s, service profit chain. I'm sure everybody has heard about this. Probably, we heard Jasmine kind of touch on it a little bit about the research from Harvard, but that, your profit for a business is directly aligned to customer loyalty. Loyalty is directly aligned to customer satisfaction, and that is influenced by the value of the services that a customer gets. And value is created by happy, satisfied, loyal, and productive employees. So employee satisfaction is the most important driver in business profit. And study after study shows this to us. So this is a study by Gallup that shows us that businesses thrive when they have highly engaged workplaces. So businesses outperform their peers by 147% in earnings per share when they have highly engaged workforces. And not only that, they're more productive, they have higher sales. The business just thrives. And when we plot employee engagement on a graph, if it is going up and to the right, you can almost guarantee that when we plot the employee engagement, that business profits are also going up and to the right. I hear this time and time again, and we've got some studies that we'll talk to you about that. Equally, when employees are disengaged, we also see that. It is so visible. I mentioned Glassdoor. People don't just post what they ate for lunch yesterday. They also post how they're feeling about work. And disengagement is costly. The Queen's School of Business and Gallup talk about the fact that disengaged workers have higher absenteeism, more accidents, more errors, and those organizations as a whole have lower productivity, lower profit, lower job growth. The list goes on and on. So we've talked about, employee engagement directly results the bottom line business profits. How do we start to tackle that black box of employee engagement, as Jasmine has called it? Well, lucky for us at Achievers, Harvard Business Review agrees with us that actually just recognizing your employees is the simplest way to increase employee engagement. And we need simple, right? We have so many tools, so many different areas that we're trying to tackle employee engagement. We need something simple. But not only is recognition the simplest way to tackle employee engagement, it is also the number one trigger of employee engagement. And if you go on from there, you see not only is it the number one trigger of employee engagement, but it can also create alignment, improve communication. When you have a great recognition program, you're breaking down barriers and breaking down silos and increasing transparency. Here's a study of one of our customers, 200,000 employees. I absolutely love this study. And the reason I love this study is because this is an example of how recognition can drive employee engagement, but not just recognition, non-monetary recognition. So we don't always need to throw rewards at employees to have that impact. It's really about that intrinsic motivation. And what we can see here is this organization, those employees who were recognized at least 12 times a year had a 17-point higher employee engagement score. Pardon me, just moving along. And I want to talk about an organization right here in the UK that we know and we love, the Shop Direct, who you may all know by the very.co.uk or Littlewoods brand, partners with Achievers. And in the early 2000s, Shop Direct was going through a major business transformation. So they were moving from a fully catalog-based organization to fully online and digital. And what they were seeing is that their employees were giving them feedback saying they wanted to feel more recognized and more connected to this new business transformation and the goals. So Shop Direct engaged with Achievers, and we built a recognition program together. We partnered on it, and the name of the recognition program is Shine, and Shine is now a verb within the halls of Shop Direct. They've seen more than 1 million recognitions flowing to employees in the platform, and over 7 recognitions a month, which is really important because you start to see, and you can see right here, they've increased as well their employee engagement scores by 17 points. And the frequency of recognition is a key for us because, I could exercise once a year and expect to see change, but that is just not a reality. So, moving that middle majority and making sure that all employees in the organization know what good looks like and are receiving recognition for the great things that are happening every day. And further to that, Shop Direct's business is thriving. They've had increased profits of 43.6%. Now, you can ask anybody on the people team at Shop Direct, and they would say that recognition is a major strategic driver and contributor to that. Okay, so we talked about leveraging recognition to drive employee engagement and why employee engagement is so important to business outcomes, and shared some examples of our customers who've achieved significant increases in employee engagement. And the way they do that is by making recognition frequent, real-time, available to all employees, transparent, and tied to organizational values and goals. So connecting back to that importance of tying the connection between the employees and the employers. And ultimately, when we have happier and aligned employees, we benefit from those better business outcomes. But at Achievers, we thought we didn't want to stop there. We know, as Jasmine talked about, employee engagement is still a puzzle. Recognition is the one major trigger. But we thought, what if we took that frequent, bite-sized, real-time action and feedback, and what if we applied those principles to the employee engagement measurement space? So studies tell us that about 11% of organizations are doing employee engagement surveys more than once a year. Once a year, we're collecting feedback from our employees. That is not enough. We need to be listening in a more regular, real-time basis. I had an opportunity recently to hear Tony Denker speak, and Tony is the CEO of the Productivity Leadership Group here in the UK. And Tony talked about the fact that we are using decade-old tools to solve the problems of today and how it is critically important to include the voices of our employees to make small incremental improvements in the business every single day. And typically we're asking once a year. And even when we do ask, it is difficult for us to take action. Now I want to talk a little bit about what we're treating employee engagement like today. We're treating it as if it's static so that we can look at it once, maybe even if we're doing better than that, it's 4 times a year. We're treating it as if it's generic. We're assuming that these big organizational changes that we put in place once a year are going to capture the employee engagement of the masses. And we're treating it as if it's automatic. So if we download the data and we send it out, then it will result in action. And we know that that is not the case. In fact, about 30% of managers are taking action on employee engagement results, mainly because they don't have a lot of time or they don't know what to do about it. I want to talk a little bit more about each of these. We know engagement is fluid. We don't need research to tell us engagement is fluid. We know it because we live it every day. How I feel about work today is different than how I will feel about it tomorrow, and it has no relationship on how I'll feel about work in 3 weeks from now. What research can tell us, however, is how big of a swing employee engagement can be. So year over year, up to 45% of employees can dramatically change their engagement level. What that means is they can actually poll in an entirely different band. So they can move from being engaged to being disengaged, and we don't even know. This is how we lose our top talent by surprise. And we're not empowering our managers to make these changes and take action, even if we do collect the data. We also know that engagement's not generic. There's no one solution that fits all. Of course, when we do make these changes, for example, let's say, we collect that yearly feedback and we decide that we're going to roll out a company-wide learning development portal. These are important elements. They don't go away. But what we need to do is be taking action on a more regular basis and listening to our employees, because they are 1 in 250 million, not even 1 in 200 million. So we need to be connecting with people based on how they're personally wired and who they are. So there has been quite a change in the way that we're measuring. Lots of organizations that we're talking to are measuring employee engagement on a quarterly basis or doing more pulse surveys, but HR is collecting mountains and mountains of data, and they're not effectively able to take action. And action is required. I go back to what Tony said about the ability to take micro actions every single day is what's going to be the real changing aspect of employee engagement for us. So I don't believe that employees have survey fatigue. I think they have inaction fatigue. So we just have to ask ourselves, how are managers doing with creating and completing action plans? And if the answer is we don't know, or what the research tells us, which is at best 30% of leaders are taking action, we can definitely improve there. And last but not least, in this space, what we're seeing is that nobody is empowering the employee themselves to take their own action on their employee engagement. And we know that when we can bring in the feedback in bite-sized and real-time, which we've done for many years in the recognition space, when we do that, we have a positive impact on employee engagement, retention, performance, productivity. We've seen this time and time again, and we believe there's an incredible opportunity to accelerate employee engagement even more. So I want you to meet Allie. Allie is our active listening interface, and Allie is going to help us close that loop between feedback and action. Allie's always on, capturing personalized information and suggesting bite-sized actions. So Allie will prompt the employee, or the employee can call up Allie and Allie asks, how are you feeling about work today? And then Allie will go on to prompt categories about how somebody might be feeling. So it's about their role or their job or their development. And then Allie can serve up bite-sized actions to the employee about how they can empower themselves to become more engaged at work. So for example, let's say an employee says, I really wish we had more wellness initiatives. And Allie says, hey, did you know we actually have this cycle scheme available? Go here to learn more and potentially sign up. Or an employee says, I'm ready to develop myself to that next level. And Allie serves up information either from your LMS or a white paper about how to get to that next level depending on where they're looking to go. Empowering employees to take action. Then that information gets filtered to the managers based on their individual teams. So a manager can see their check-in information and have, for example, in the example of the career development, serve up to a manager, Allie will say, hey, your team's really interested in learning more about career development. You should facilitate a meeting with your team to talk about that. And another aspect of Allie is pulse surveys or on demand. I think everyone's pretty familiar with this. It's a very hot topic and concept that more and more organizations are putting in place today, is measuring more regularly, whether it's quarterly or pulse surveys. And I was at an HR event last year, and I had a roundtable with a number of HRDs, and they were actually talking about how they wanted to get here, but we're still in the yearly space. So, we really do have to start capturing that feedback more frequently, but we also need to be able to act on it. And I'm going to tell you a story about George and how Allie helps George walk through a pulse survey. So it's the day of the pulse survey is ready to go out. George gets an email saying the pulse survey is going to go out to your team. The first thing Allie asks is for George to reflect on the outcomes of the last survey. For example, in the last survey, George and his team decided that their outcome was going to be to increase collaboration. So Allie asked George, tell me how you did on increasing collaboration. Reflect on that for a minute, and let's talk about that. Allie also prompts George to set up his next steps, suggest the most effective way to communicate back with his team. So George, before the survey is even gone out, is setting up action plan to tackle when the survey comes back. Allie suggests to George a calendar invite for his team, post-survey results, where he can discuss with his team the results of the survey. So even before the survey is finished, George's team is feeling like George cares about what their feedback is and is taking this very seriously. So Allie is coaching George every step along the way. The results are in. George can dive right in real time. He doesn't have to wait for the data to be crunched. The survey's closed for the quarter, and Allie lets George know. Allie also allows George to download a PDF, perhaps to take to his leader to talk about, download a PowerPoint to take to his team to discuss, and suggests an agenda on exactly the types of elements that his team specifically would like to talk about. And this is important because we know leaders lack time. They don't often even know exactly what to do with their engagement results. And this is taking those engagement results and driving real action specific to George's team, not to the entire organization. So if we take that real personalized, bite-sized approach, we can start to take the employee engagement heavy lifting and move it from just on the shoulders of HR to empower the managers to tackle employee engagement and to also empower employees to tackle their own employee engagement. Because we believe in the future, employee engagement will actually be owned by the employee. Questions?
Great. Thanks very much, Denise, and Jasmine as well for your presentation. Some really great insight and advice there for people to take away with them. So let's swiftly move on to the Q&A now so we can get through as many questions as possible. If you haven't already submitted a question and you have one, there's still time to do so. So please just pop your question in the Q&A submission box at the bottom of your screen. So first question we had in from Anna Bowman is directed towards Jasmine, and she just wanted to ask, what do you mean by choosing people over processes? Could you elaborate on this, please, Jasmine?
Yeah, of course. That's a great question. I think what I'm trying to communicate with that is that the processes that people have come up with, all the tools and the research and so on that I mentioned earlier, and the methods are all great, but it's not one size fits all. And so you want to prioritize your employees over the processes and make sure that the process fits the employees. So I mentioned, for example, staff forums, and it's one of the methods that I think works really well in terms of prioritizing people over process. So of course there is a process there. There's always a process. But what it does there in the case of a staff forum is it enables people's fears, concerns, their suggestions to be filtered up to management so that people feel heard. You know, in my experience, employees have two huge fears, and they are not being listened to and not being treated fairly. And so that is what I mean about prioritizing people over process is, do they have a channel? Does the process allow the employees themselves to actually communicate what they'd like to communicate?
Great, thanks for clarifying, Jasmine. And Denise, you mentioned in one of your slides that customer experience is never going to be better than your employee experience, which is a really important point. Do you think we're seeing this transition to focusing more on the whole employee experience rather than just looking at engagement? Or is this something that we in HR need to be putting more effort into?
Yeah, I think we're seeing employees first or people becoming more part of the strategic agenda across the board. We saw it today even in the poll question. I think there's just so much that's coming at HR and at employees. You know, Jasmine mentioned well-being, and financial well-being is one that is popping up everywhere these days. And so every time we turn around, it feels like there's something new that we're responsible for. So I do think, a consolidation effort is going to be important in HR, is to think about how do we, listen to the employees' voices, recognize, but then tying in the initiatives on all the other elements of employee engagement so that, the employees having that one experience.
Great, and sort of leading on from that question, for those who approach employee engagement in sort of more of a traditional way, using the annual employee engagement survey, for example, what would you say are some of the first steps that they can take to transition to listening to and recognizing their employee more regularly?
Yeah, it's a great question. It is a journey. It's definitely a journey. So we always talk about crawl, walk, run, and understanding where we're at and where we want to get to. But we've really designed our tools, and I think Jasmine talked about this at the beginning. We've designed our software for employees. So it's one of the few pieces of software that's not required and is designed for employees and is highly utilized, which is interesting. But I think it's about making sure that it's simple and easy and it matches with the way employees expect to interact today. So if we are going to bring technology into the fold, it has to have that right employee experience so that it breaks down the barriers to collecting that feedback.
Thanks, Denise. And Jasmine, do you have any further comments on that question?
On the question, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. So just for those who approach employee engagement in quite a traditional way, what would you say are some of the first steps they need to take to transition to listening to and recognizing employees more regularly?
I think maybe a good thing to do is to focus on the benefits. So there are loads of benefits to listening to your employees, whether it's increased loyalty or retention or things like that. Because in my experience, I find that there's a fear of listening, that it's all going to be criticism or that people think that management are doing a terrible job or that their companies aren't doing what they're meant to be doing. And there's this real fear, I think, about what people are going to actually say when you start to listen to them. So I think the first step you have to take is almost a mental adjustment to the idea that actually it's going to be a really interesting dialogue and that your employees also want the company to do really well. You both have the same vested interest in the survival, the well-being of the business over the long term. And if you focus on that end goal, then maybe taking the steps towards getting there will be easier.
Great, thanks, Jasmine. Yeah. And Denise, I know you went into some really great detail on real-time recognition. We had a question from Sophie Blackburn saying, can you discuss some other practical ways to do employee recognition successfully? Is it a simple well done, an email to all saying congratulations, gifts? How can companies make recognition part of their normal organizational activity?
Yeah, I think, one thing that's really important is that it does not have to be tied to these large value rewards. That has its place in the organization, but just non-monetary recognition for a job well done on a regular basis tied to the organizational values. So, employees are exhibiting behaviors every day that are fantastic, doing good work every day. We often recognize just the outcome, but we also need to be recognizing the journey, the behaviors that help us get to wwhere we're going. So frequency, transparency, non-monetary, little and often are a couple of the pieces of advice.
And talking about recognition frequency, can you elaborate a bit on how you can drive this frequency of recognition?
Yes. So frequency of recognition, really starts from the change management phase. So understanding where we are at today, engaging stakeholders across the business. Jasmine talked about this already, but speaking to stakeholders across the business about the outcomes of recognition and driving employee engagement, and engaging those leaders to lead by example. So you cannot delegate a culture, and it's really about walking the talk. So when we have leadership engagement in the recognition side of the employee engagement initiative, you start to see that frequency. Communications is also a big part of that, and I did already touch on this a little bit, but making sure that whatever you are putting in front of the employees is built for the employees and is simple and easy to use, and is able to be accessed in the flow of work. So employees have very different day-to-day roles. Some employees are in the office behind a computer, others are out on the road, and so really thinking through how to make sure that everyone has access.
Great, thanks, Denise. And I wanted to bring culture into this conversation, as I think it's becoming an ever more important thing for companies to ensure that they are effectively communicating their culture and their purpose and their values to employees. So could you tell us in what ways real-time recognition tools help to do this? We could maybe start with Jasmine.
Sure. Well, I think, as Denise said, you can't delegate culture. So it has to absolutely be clear that it's in the very fabric of your culture. And so there's almost a meta thing happening there, where by just saying this is what we're going to be doing, which means we're actually listening to you, you are demonstrating to people that it's in the culture itself, as long as, of course, that you do something about it. Listening's not enough. You also have to react. And I think that's what the real-time recognition communicates to people pretty quickly. And I think that's actually really important. If people don't see it in the culture, you hear this with training all the time. Training is really ineffective unless the organization is embedding it in the culture as well. So, and it almost becomes this really important aspect is to communicate about the culture itself and talk about the health of the organization in terms of its culture, and demonstrate that it is in the fabric of the culture and not just something that we say we're going to do and then don't follow.
And Denise, do you have any further comments there?
Yeah, I would add that for every one of our customers, every recognition is tied to a value or behavior that is important to the organization. So every great thing that happens ties up to that strategic initiative of the business.
Great, thank you. So another question that I wanted to ask is, of course, this whole presentation has showed really how important it is for us to continue with our employee engagement efforts, maybe changing the ways we do this through perhaps real-time technology tools. But how do we ensure that these activities remain a top priority when faced with cost-cutting initiatives? Jasmine, could we start with you?
I think that's the time that it's most important, because that's when engagement dips. And so the whole point of any kind of engagement process is to help people get through difficult change while maintaining or hopefully improving business as usual, but at least maintaining it. And if you don't engage your people during the most difficult periods of change, then the difficult change is not going to go through well. So it's the most important time to do it, and I think that's when you really want to be listening to the fears and concerns that people have, or their suggestions, anything like that, where they might have some really good ideas. They're a fresh pair of eyes. So I think especially in times of difficult change, you want to be engaging people. That should be at the forefront.
Denise, any further comments?
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. It's when there's uncertainty happening that it's more important to create that alignment. And also, I talked about this a little bit through the presentation, but well over half of all the recognitions that flow through our platform across all of our customers are non-monetary in nature. And many of our customers have been able to see a visible impact in employee engagement leveraging non-monetary recognition or social recognition.
Great, thank you, Denise. So just moving on to a sort of question around the kind of technologies that can be used here. So it's really rewarding when you're personally recognised for your efforts, and perhaps part of that positive feeling you get through the face-to-face element of it. So, for example, being Employee of the Month in a company meeting or something like that. So with these real-time technology tools, for example, with Ali, do you think that takes away the human element of it, Denise?
I think that's a fantastic question, and one that I was almost certain was going to come up. I think we hear this quite a bit because it is a really good question for us to be asking. We need to make sure we don't over-engineer these things. But actually, today we're asking employees for their voices once a year. They press a button, and then, I think we've discovered 70% of the time, nothing. So, Ali has an interactive discussion with the employee, makes suggestions, but then also prompts the manager to have a meaningful discussion and tells them what to have that discussion about. And I think that's the key element that has been missing. I personally, in past years have received employee engagement information and went, great, but now what? What do I do with this? And that's the key element. We're actually going to encourage more one-to-one conversations by empowering managers to be able to take action.
Great. Thank you very much, Denise. So I think, unfortunately, that's all the questions we have time for now. But before we close up, if you'd like to get in contact with Achievers, their contact details are on screen. And also, there's a speaker bio icon on your screen as well. And so if you'd like to get in contact with HRZone or Jasmine, you can also do so by clicking on those. So, we're more than happy to hear from you if you have any further questions. You'll also get a copy of the recording sent to you so that you can re-engage with it in your own time. And just a reminder that if you wanted to do some further reading on the topic, you can download the white paper by clicking on the green icon. So I think that's just about everything. Thanks very much to Denise and Jasmine and to everyone who attended today. We hope you enjoyed the webinar and that you have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you.